June 6, 1944. 6:30 in the morning. Omaha Beach, Normandy. Private First Class Carlton Barrett waded through neck-deep water toward the shore with his M1 Garand rifle held above his head. The salt water stung his eyes. The weight of his equipment dragged at his legs with every step. Around him, the water churned with explosions and the thrashing of men struggling to survive. German machine guns had been firing for hours. Bodies floated in the surf around him. Landing craft burned on the sandbars where they had struck underwater obstacles that the naval bombardment had failed to destroy. Smoke from explosions mixed with the morning mist, creating a grey haze that smelled of cordite and burning fuel and death. Barrett was 23 years old. A rifleman with the 18th Infantry Regiment, 1st Infantry Division. The Big Red One, they called it. He had trained with this weapon for 2 years at bases across England, firing thousands of rounds until the rifle felt like an extension of his own body. Now he was about to find out if it could keep him alive. The Germans defending those bluffs had every advantage imaginable. Concrete bunkers with walls 3 feet thick that shrugged off naval shells, interlocking fields of fire that covered every inch of beach with overlapping arcs of death. Pre-registered artillery coordinates that allowed them to drop shells precisely where they wanted. Minefields, barbed wire, tank traps, and the infamous MG-42 machine gun that American soldiers had already learned to call Hitler's buzzsaw because it fired 1,200 rounds per minute, so fast that individual shots blended into a single, terrifying rip of sound like fabric being torn. But the Germans also had a disadvantage they did not fully understand yet. Every American rifleman climbing those beaches carried 8 rounds of .30 caliber ammunition that could be fired as fast as he could pull the trigger. The German rifleman above them carried 5 rounds that required working a bolt between each shot. That difference, barely a second between shots, would change everything about infantry combat in the Second World War. What happened over the following 11 months would force the German military to completely rethink how ground warfare worked. The supremacy of the machine gun would be challenged by the sheer volume of fire that American rifle squads could generate. Tactics that had worked for decades would become obsolete virtually overnight. The entire structure of infantry combat would have to be reconsidered, and it all came down to a weapon designed by a French-Canadian immigrant who never received a single dollar in royalties for the millions of rifles that bore his name. This is the story of the M1 Garand, the rifle that German infantry learned to fear. The man who created that rifle was born Jean Cantius Garand on January 1, 1888, in a small farming community called Saint Remy, about 21 miles southwest of Montreal in Quebec, Canada. He was one of 12 children, 6 boys and 6 girls. All the boys had the official first name Saint-Jean-le-Baptiste, following French-Canadian Catholic tradition, but only Jean went by John. The others used their middle names. Several of his brothers were also inventors, suggesting that mechanical aptitude ran deep in the family bloodline. His mother died when he was just 11 years old. It was a devastating loss for the large family struggling to make a living from the rocky Quebec farmland. Shortly afterward, his father made the difficult decision to pack up the entire household and move them to Jewett City, Connecticut, searching for work in the textile mills that employed much of New England's immigrant population. Young John Garand did not speak English when he arrived in America. He learned the language while sweeping floors at a textile mill, the same place where his siblings worked long hours to support the family. The conditions were harsh. The hours stretched from dawn until after dark. The pay was minimal. Child labor laws that would later protect young workers did not yet exist in any meaningful form. But even as a child working those factory floors, Garand showed an unusual gift. He understood machines the way some people understand music or mathematics. He could look at gears and springs and levers and see how they fit together, see the logic of their design. More importantly, he could see how they could be improved. By the time he was 18, Garand had already patented 2 inventions, a telescopic screw jack and an automatic bobbin winding machine. These were not toys or curiosities. They were practical solutions to real problems that textile workers faced every day, the kind of innovations that demonstrated both mechanical aptitude and genuine business sense. He worked his way through various jobs over the following years, learning the machinist trade at every opportunity. At Brown and Sharp, a precision tool-making company in Providence, Rhode Island, he mastered the techniques of fine metalworking that would prove essential to his later career. The tolerances required for quality tools were measured in thousandths of an inch. Garand learned to work within those tolerances instinctively, developing an almost supernatural feel for what metal could and could not do. In 1916, he moved to New York City to work for another tool-making firm. During his time there, Garand practiced shooting at the galleries along Broadway. These small indoor ranges were popular entertainment in that era, and they gave him hands-on experience with firearms that most engineers never acquired. He learned how weapons felt in the hands of the men who used them, not just how they looked on paper. The combination of precision machining skills and first-hand experience with weapons would prove crucial to everything that followed. Garand was not just a theoretical engineer working from drawings and calculations. He understood the human element of firearms design in a way that set him apart from his competitors. In 1917, the United States entered the First World War. The American military suddenly needed weapons in quantities it had never imagined. The Army put out a call for designs for a light machine gun that could give American soldiers more firepower on the battlefield. Garand submitted his design, competing against established firearms manufacturers with decades of experience and far more resources. To his surprise, the War Department purchased it. More importantly, they offered him a position with the National Bureau of Standards to continue developing the weapon. His design was not produced until 1919, the year after the war ended, but Garand had proven himself valuable enough to keep on the government payroll. In November of that year, he was given a position as a consulting engineer at the Springfield Armory in Massachusetts. He became a naturalized United States citizen in 1920. The boy who had arrived from Canada, unable to speak English, was now an American working at one of the most important military facilities in the country. Springfield Armory was hallowed ground in American military history. General George Washington and his artillery chief, Colonel Henry Knox, had established it in 1777 during the Revolutionary War as a place to store weapons and supplies for the Continental Army. The armory had manufactured weapons for every American conflict since that time. Muskets for the War of 1812, rifles for the Mexican-American War, Springfield rifles for the Civil War that helped preserve the Union. More than 265,000 M1903 Springfield rifles during the First World War, though this proved insufficient for the rapidly expanding Army's needs, and many had to be produced elsewhere. The armory represented the industrial backbone of American military power. This is where Garand would spend the next 34 years of his career. This is where he would create the weapon that General George Patton would later call the greatest battle implement ever devised. But the path to that weapon would take 15 years of grueling work, political battles, and technical challenges that would have broken a lesser engineer. The problem Garand was trying to solve seems obvious in hindsight, but it was revolutionary at the time. Every major army in the world equipped its infantry with bolt-action rifles: the German Gewehr 98, the British Lee Enfield, the American Springfield M1903, the Soviet Mosin Nagant, the Japanese Arisaka, the Italian Carcano. After each shot, the soldier had to manually work the bolt, ejecting the spent cartridge and loading a new round into the chamber. This process took time. More importantly, it required the soldier to move his hand from the trigger, shift his grip on the weapon, pull back the bolt handle, push it forward again, return his hand to the trigger, and reacquire his target through the sights. During those precious seconds, he was not shooting. He was vulnerable. His eye left the target. His concentration broke. His position shifted ever so slightly. A skilled rifleman could fire perhaps 10 to 15 aimed rounds per minute with a bolt-action rifle. The British Army had trained its soldiers to achieve even higher rates with the Lee Enfield, which had a particularly smooth bolt action designed specifically for rapid fire. The legendary Mad Minute drills pushed soldiers to fire 15 or more aimed shots in 60 seconds. But no matter how skilled the soldier, he could not overcome the fundamental limitation of the bolt-action design itself. Garand believed he could design a rifle that would do all of that automatically. Fire a round, use the expanding gases from that round to cycle the action, eject the spent cartridge, load a new round from the magazine, return to battery ready to fire, all in a fraction of a second, all while the soldier kept his hand on the grip and his eye on the target. No need to break concentration. No need to shift position. Just pull the trigger again. The technology was not completely unknown. Machine guns used similar principles to achieve automatic fire, but machine guns were heavy, complex, crew-served weapons. They required tripods or bipods for stability. They overheated during sustained fire and needed water or air cooling systems. They consumed ammunition at rates that no individual soldier could carry. They were not suitable for riflemen who needed to move quickly across the battlefield. The Army had tried semi-automatic rifles before. The Mondragon rifle from Mexico had seen limited use in the First World War, primarily by German aviators. The French RSC-17 had appeared late in that conflict. Various American prototypes had been tested and rejected. They were all unreliable, complex, and prone to jamming at the worst possible moments. The brass was deeply skeptical that a semi-automatic rifle could be made robust enough for ordinary infantry use in the mud, rain, snow, sand, and chaos of actual combat. The bolt-action rifles they knew worked. Why risk the unknown? But they gave Garand the resources to try. What followed was a decade and a half of prototypes, failures, redesigns, and political maneuvering that would test Garand's patience and determination to their absolute limits. His first design, the M1922, was built in 1924 and ready for testing at Fort Benning in 1925. It used a primer-operated breech mechanism and fired the standard .30 caliber ammunition. The results were inconclusive. The rifle worked, but not reliably enough for military service. Garand improved it. The M1924 performed better, but still did not clearly beat its competitors, which included designs from major manufacturers like Pedersen and Thompson. The Army wanted more trials before committing to any design. By 1928, Garand had developed a gas-operated model in a smaller caliber designated .276. This version performed well in tests against the Pedersen rifle and other competitors. It beat them consistently in reliability trials. The infantry and cavalry boards were impressed. The weapon appeared ready for adoption at last. Then politics intervened. General Douglas MacArthur, the Army Chief of Staff, did not want to change calibers. The Army had millions of rounds of .30 caliber ammunition stockpiled from the First World War, mountains of brass and lead and powder sitting in depots across the country. Switching to a new caliber would mean all of that ammunition was useless. The cost would be enormous. The logistics would be a nightmare. On February 25, 1932, the Adjutant General ordered all work on the .276 caliber rifles to cease immediately and completely. All resources were to be directed toward improving the .30 caliber Garand. It was a setback that could have ended the entire project. The .30 caliber round, known formally as the .30-06 Springfield, was substantially more powerful than the .276. The gas system that had worked so well with the smaller cartridge needed to be completely redesigned. Pressures were higher, recoil forces were greater. The entire operating mechanism required recalculation and rebuilding from scratch. Garand had to essentially start over after nearly a decade of work. But he persisted. He went back to his workshop and began again. On August 3, 1933, the redesigned rifle was officially designated the Semi-Automatic Rifle, caliber .30, M1. 2 years of additional testing and refinement followed. 75 rifles were produced for field trials in May 1934. 50 went to infantry units at various posts around the country. 25 went to cavalry units. Problems were reported from the field. Garand fixed them one by one with the methodical patience that characterized his entire career. On January 9, 1936, the rifle was finally standardized for Army use. The United States became the first nation in the world to adopt a semi-automatic rifle as its standard infantry weapon. It was a momentous decision that would give American soldiers a firepower advantage for years to come. The first production model was successfully proof-fired, function-fired, and fired for accuracy on July 21, 1937. After nearly 2 decades of development, John Garand's rifle was ready for mass production, but production would prove almost as challenging as development. Springfield Armory began manufacturing the M1 Garand at a rate of just 10 rifles per day. The weapon was complex by the standards of the time. Each rifle contained dozens of precision-machined parts that had to fit together perfectly. The gas system required careful calibration. The barrel had to be properly seated and head-spaced. The trigger mechanism needed individual adjustment. Within 2 years, production reached 100 rifles per day. The armory had developed new techniques, new tooling, new manufacturing processes to speed production without sacrificing quality. Workers learned to spot defects at every stage of the manufacturing process. By January 1941, with war clouds gathering over Europe and Asia, production hit 600 rifles per day. American industry was gearing up for a conflict that seemed increasingly inevitable, even though the nation was officially neutral. When the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, the army was still not fully equipped with the new rifle. Many units still carried the old M1903 Springfield bolt-action. The Marines in the Pacific, the soldiers guarding the Philippines, the garrisons in Hawaii and elsewhere had a mix of old and new weapons. The transition was incomplete. The race to arm American soldiers with Garand's semi-automatic rifle had become a race against time itself. Springfield Armory ramped up to unprecedented production levels. Winchester Repeating Arms Company received contracts to produce M1 rifles as well. Workers shifted to 7-day weeks. Night shifts were added. Women entered the workforce in large numbers to replace men who had enlisted. The entire industrial might of the United States focused on producing the tools of war. By January 1944, Springfield alone was producing 122,000 rifles per month. That translated to 3,936 rifles per day, 164 rifles per hour, nearly 3 rifles rolling off the production line every single minute, around the clock, 7 days a week. Winchester contributed over 513,000 rifles before their contract ended in June 1945. By the end of the war, over 4 million M1 Garands had been manufactured. It was the largest production effort in the long history of Springfield Armory. American industrial capacity had turned Garand's elegant design into an arsenal that would equip the largest military force the world had ever seen. John Garand never received royalties for any of them. He had transferred all patent rights to the United States government on January 20, 1936. A true patriot, he offered his invention to his adopted country without demanding compensation. His highest annual salary was $12,000, roughly equivalent to what a skilled factory foreman might earn. A bill was introduced in Congress to award him $100,000 in appreciation for his contribution to national defense. It failed to pass. The inventor of the weapon that would help win the Second World War never received the financial reward his genius deserved. Garand did receive some recognition. The Meritorious Civilian Service Award in 1941, the Medal for Merit in 1944, one of the first 2 ever awarded. But no fortune, just the satisfaction of knowing that his rifle was in the hands of American soldiers around the world. The M1 Garand that those soldiers carried weighed 9.5 pounds empty and just over 10 pounds with a loaded clip and sling. It measured 43.5 inches in overall length with a 24-inch barrel. The action was gas, operated with a rotating bolt that locked securely into the receiver with 2 lugs. The magazine was internal, loaded from above with an 8-round en-bloc clip. This was a distinctive feature that set the Garand apart from other designs. The ammunition clip, a simple U-shaped piece of steel, held 8 rounds of .30-06 Springfield ammunition in a staggered formation. When inserted into the rifle from above, the clip remained in place until the last round was fired. Then it ejected automatically with a distinctive metallic ping sound, and the bolt locked open, ready for reloading. The .30-06 Springfield cartridge it fired had a muzzle velocity of 2,800 feet per second. The round could penetrate a standard military helmet at 500 yards. The effective range was 500 yards for an average soldier, though skilled marksmen could hit targets at much greater distances. According to military specifications, a trained soldier could fire 16 to 24 aimed rounds per minute under combat conditions. That rate of fire was the key to everything that followed. A German soldier with a Carabiner 98K, arguably the finest bolt-action rifle ever produced, could manage perhaps 10 to 15 aimed rounds per minute under ideal conditions. The M1 Garand effectively doubled the aimed firepower of the American rifleman compared to his German counterpart. 2 rounds for every one. 2 chances to hit for every one. And critically, the American soldier never had to break his concentration or shift his grip to work a bolt mechanism between shots. The first time the M1 Garand faced German forces in significant numbers was during Operation Torch, the Allied invasion of Vichy French North Africa, on November 8, 1942. American troops landed on beaches in Morocco and Algeria. Some carried the new semi-automatic rifle. Others still had the M1903 Springfield. The mix created problems that would take months to sort out. Supply lines sent the wrong ammunition clips to some units. The 8-round on-block clips designed for the M1 were not interchangeable with the 5-round stripper clips used for the Springfield. Soldiers found themselves with ammunition they could not use. In some harrowing situations, M1 rifle users had to locate their ejected clips in the sand and reload them by hand under fire. But when the M1 worked as intended, the results were dramatic. An American squad could put out twice the volume of aimed fire as a comparable enemy unit. The German soldiers they faced carried the Carabiner 98 Kurz, a superb bolt-action rifle descended from the legendary Mauser design. The action was smooth. The accuracy was excellent. German soldiers trusted their weapons implicitly and had trained with them for years. But between each shot, the German rifleman had to work the bolt. That process, so natural it became automatic for trained soldiers, still consumed precious time. The hand left the grip. The eye might leave the sight picture. The firing position shifted slightly as the shooter manipulated the mechanism. The M1 Garand had an effective range of 500 yards as well, but a trained American soldier could fire continuously, shot after shot, as fast as he could acquire targets and squeeze the trigger. In a firefight, that significant advantage in rate of fire was devastating. Word spread through the German ranks. American riflemen seemed to have automatic weapons. They could fire continuously without pause. German tactics that had worked against bolt-action rifles for 20 years were suddenly obsolete. Japanese soldiers in the Pacific experienced the same shock. When American Marines armed with M1 Garands landed on islands across the Pacific, Japanese defenders wondered how the Americans could afford to equip every infantryman with what seemed like a machine gun. The high volume of .30 caliber fire from M1-equipped units was unlike anything they had faced before. The fighting in North Africa continued through May 1943. American forces, initially green and sometimes poorly led, improved steadily with experience. They learned from their mistakes. They learned how to use their superior firepower effectively. They learned to trust their weapons. The Germans adapted by relying more heavily on their MG-42 machine guns. German infantry doctrine centered the squad around the machine gun, using riflemen primarily to support and protect the gun team. This worked well when facing enemies with similar equipment. But against Americans with semi-automatic rifles, the equation changed. American squads could suppress German machine gun positions with rifle fire alone. The Browning automatic rifle gave American units additional firepower, but even without it, a squad of M1-equipped riflemen could generate enough volume of fire to keep German machine gunners pinned down while other elements maneuvered for advantage. The MG-42 was a fearsome weapon. Its 1,200 round per minute rate of fire could shred advancing infantry in seconds. American soldiers learned to respect it deeply. They gave it nicknames that reflected their fear, the buzzsaw and the bone saw, for the terrifying sound it made. Every German platoon had one of these weapons, providing a base of fire that could dominate a battlefield. But they also learned that the gunner and his assistant were vulnerable when suppressed by accurate rifle fire. The M1 Garand could deliver that accurate fire at ranges where the machine gun crew could not easily identify and engage individual riflemen hiding in cover. German soldiers began to notice something else about the American rifle. It made a distinctive metallic ping sound when its 8-round clip was ejected after the last shot. The en-bloc clip, stripped of ammunition, flew from the action with that characteristic noise. Some German soldiers tried to exploit this, waiting for the ping before attacking, hoping to catch the American reloading with an empty weapon. If they could time their advance to the moment when an American rifle was empty, they might gain a crucial advantage. But this tactic rarely worked in practice. Former German soldiers interviewed after the war explained why. In the noise and chaos of combat, with explosions, machine gun fire, rifle shots, mortars, grenades, screaming, and shouting, that ping was nearly impossible to hear. Even soldiers with excellent hearing found it completely lost in the cacophony of battle. And even if a soldier did hear it, the American rifleman was not alone. His squadmates were still armed and ready. Charging one empty rifle meant facing 7 or 8 loaded ones. Robert Bell, an M1 Garand armourer with the civilian marksmanship program, who spoke with German veterans and panzer commanders after the war, asked them directly about the ping. They all said the same thing: we were getting shot at. Our hearing already was not that great. We did not listen for that ping. Some American veterans claimed they threw empty clips on rocks to simulate the ping sound, luring Germans into exposing themselves for a fatal shot. 1st Infantry Division veterans in particular spoke of this trick. Whether this actually happened regularly in combat or became an embellished story told in bars after the war is difficult to verify with certainty. What is documented is that the ping never became the tactical vulnerability that some had feared it would be. By the summer of 1943, American forces had driven the Axis powers out of North Africa entirely. The invasion of Sicily followed in July, the Italian mainland in September. Each campaign brought more American soldiers into contact with German defenders. Each campaign also brought more M1 Garands into the theatre. Supply problems were gradually resolved as American logistics caught up with demand. New units arrived, fully equipped with the semi-automatic rifle. Veterans who had fought with Springfields received the new weapon as replacements became available. German intelligence was well aware of the American semi-automatic rifle and its capabilities. Reports filtered back through prisoner interrogations, captured documents, and battlefield observation. The firepower advantage was documented and analyzed by German ordnance officers who recognized the growing threat. The German military tried to respond. Germany had experimented with semi-automatic rifles before encountering the M1 in combat. The Gewehr 41, developed by both Mauser and Walther, entered limited production in 1941, but it was heavy, complex, unreliable, and difficult to manufacture. German soldiers who received it often complained that it jammed constantly, especially in muddy or dusty conditions. The gas trap system used in its design was prone to fouling. When Germany invaded the Soviet Union in June 1941, German troops encountered Soviet soldiers armed with the SVT-40, a semi-automatic rifle that used a simpler gas-operated system. The SVT-40 had its own problems, but its operating system caught German attention. German engineers studied captured SVT-40 rifles and incorporated elements of their design into an improved weapon. The result was the Gewehr 43, which entered production in October 1943. The G43 was a significant improvement over the G41. It was lighter, more reliable, and used a 10-round detachable magazine. German military planners intended to equip each infantry company with 19 G43 rifles, including 10 fitted with scopes for designated marksmen. But Germany was already losing the war of production. The factories that might have manufactured G43 rifles were being bombed by Allied aircraft around the clock. Raw materials were scarce. Skilled workers were being drafted into the Wehrmacht. The industrial capacity simply did not exist. For every 50 Mauser bolt-action rifles Germany produced during the war, they manufactured only one G43. Total production reached roughly 400,000 rifles, compared to the more than 4 million M1 Garands produced by the United States. The G43 also suffered from quality control problems as the war progressed. Late production models used inferior materials and showed poor workmanship. The extractor was a known weak point that broke frequently. Many soldiers simply discarded their G43 rifles when they malfunctioned and picked up Carabiner 98K bolt actions instead. Some German veterans interviewed after the war admitted they preferred captured American M1 Garands to their own G43 rifles when they could obtain them and find ammunition. The Garand was simpler, more reliable, easier to maintain, and built to higher quality standards. It worked when you needed it to work. Germany did develop one weapon during the war that represented a genuine advancement in infantry firepower. The Sturmgewehr 44, often considered the world's first true assault rifle, combined the firepower of a submachine gun with the range of a rifle by using an intermediate cartridge. The STG-44 was an impressive weapon that would influence rifle design for decades afterward. It could fire in semi-automatic or fully automatic mode. Its 30-round magazine gave individual soldiers tremendous firepower. Its intermediate 7.92 by 33mm Kurz cartridge had adequate range for most combat while allowing controllable automatic fire. But it came too late and in too few numbers to affect the outcome of the war. Production only began in significant quantities in 1944, and total output was around 425,000 rifles. By the time German soldiers faced significant numbers of STG-44 equipped units, the war was already decided. When Allied forces landed in Normandy on June 6, 1944, German defenders braced for what they knew was coming. Private First Class Carlton Barrett survived the initial assault on Omaha Beach. Under heavy fire that killed men all around him, he repeatedly returned to the surf to help drowning comrades reach the shore. Disregarding the personal danger, he waded back into the water again and again, pulling men to safety while bullets kicked up spray around him. He continued fighting throughout the day, using his M1 Garand to engage German positions on the bluffs above. Despite intense small arms and mortar fire poured down on the beach, he helped establish the vital radio communication that allowed commanders to coordinate the assault. His actions earned him the Medal of Honor. The citation specifically noted his gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty. Barrett was one of 4 American soldiers who received the Medal of Honor for actions on D-Day. All 4 carried the M1 Garand into battle that morning, but the true impact of the rifle became clear in the weeks and months that followed the initial landings. The fighting in the hedgerows of Normandy was brutal, close-quarters combat unlike anything American soldiers had trained for in England. The bocage, as the French called it, was a landscape of small fields surrounded by dense hedgerows. These were not simple bushes. They were earthen banks 3 to 4 feet high, topped with dense vegetation that had grown for centuries. Each field was a natural defensive position. Each hedgerow provided cover and concealment for German defenders. Visibility was measured in yards rather than hundreds of yards. Engagements were sudden and vicious. Men fought at ranges where they could see the expressions on their enemies' faces. In this environment, the M1 Garand's rapid-fire capability proved decisive. American soldiers could engage multiple targets quickly, suppressing enemy positions, while their comrades maneuvered through gaps blown in the hedgerows by tanks equipped with steel-cutting devices invented by an American sergeant. German soldiers armed with bolt-action rifles found themselves outgunned in these close-range encounters. The time required to work the bolt between shots was time the American rifleman could use to fire 2 or 3 additional rounds. In a fight measured in seconds, that difference determined who lived and who died. Donald Burgett, a paratrooper with the 101st Airborne Division, who jumped into Normandy on D-Day, praised the M1 Garand as what he believed to be the best rifle made. He noted that some would claim the M1 had a tendency to jam, which he denied from his own extensive combat experience. Instead of jamming, Burgett noted that sometimes the operating rods would crack at the angle where the rod body meets the charging handle. When this happened, soldiers would discard the rifle and retrieve another from a fallen comrade. But this issue was not common, and the rifle's overall reliability far exceeded its competitors. By late summer 1944, many American non-commissioned officers and field officers who had been issued M1 carbines swapped them for Garand rifles. The carbine was lighter at just over 5 pounds compared to the Garand's 9.5. It was popular with soldiers who appreciated not carrying extra weight. But the carbine's 30 caliber pistol cartridge lacked the power for European combat. It could not penetrate the wooden doors, brick walls, and earthen embankments that provided cover everywhere in the hedgerows and villages. The .30-06 Springfield round fired by the M1 Garand could blast through obstacles that stopped the carbine cold. As American forces pushed eastward through France, Belgium, and into Germany itself, the M1 Garand's reputation solidified among soldiers on both sides. The Battle of the Bulge, Germany's last major offensive on the Western Front, demonstrated the M1 Garand's value under the worst possible conditions. On December 16, 1944, more than 200,000 German troops and nearly 1,000 tanks launched a surprise attack through the Ardennes forest in Belgium and Luxembourg. The assault struck American units that were resting and refitting after months of combat. 4 American divisions held a 75-mile stretch of front line. The weather was brutal. One of the worst winters in European memory brought snow, ice, and temperatures that dropped well below freezing. Fuel froze in vehicle tanks. Weapons malfunctioned from the cold. Frostbite claimed casualties alongside enemy fire. American soldiers fought in conditions that tested every piece of equipment they carried. Weapons that worked perfectly in temperate climates failed in the cold. Lubricants thickened to the consistency of molasses. Metal became brittle. Mechanisms froze solid. The M1 Garand performed remarkably well under these conditions. Its gas-operated system continued to function in the cold when properly maintained. Soldiers cleaned their rifles whenever possible, keeping the action free of ice and snow that could cause malfunctions. O.B. Hill served with the 508 Parachute Infantry Regiment of the 82nd Airborne Division. He had made the D-Day jump, been wounded in France, evacuated to England, and returned to his unit just in time for the Battle of the Bulge. He fought from December 17th through January 26th, when he was wounded a second time. In interviews years later, Hill described the M1 Garand as a reliable weapon. He said he kept it clean as much as possible. Even during the Bulge, in miserable conditions, he cleaned his rifle every time he had the chance and tried to keep the snow and dirt out of it as much as possible. He never had any problems with it, not once. Since he was a non-commissioned officer, Hill had been given a choice of weapons. He could carry an M1 rifle, a Thompson submachine gun, a regular carbine, or a folding stock M1A1 carbine. He chose to continue carrying the M1 rifle because it was an efficient weapon that had gotten him through tough situations before. He did not think having a Thompson was much of an advantage. The defense of Bastogne became legendary during the Bulge. The 101st Airborne Division, surrounded and outnumbered, refused German demands for surrender. When German commanders sent a formal surrender demand to Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, he reportedly replied with a single word: nuts. The paratroopers at Bastogne relied on their M1 Garands to maintain defensive perimeters against repeated German attacks. The rifle's reliability in freezing conditions and its volume of fire helped compensate for the Americans' numerical disadvantage until relief forces could break through. By the time the offensive was contained in late January 1945, Germany had suffered over 100,000 casualties that it could not replace. American losses were also severe, approximately 89,000 killed, wounded, or captured. But the offensive that was supposed to split the Allied armies and force a negotiated peace had failed completely. When American forces crossed the Rhine River into Germany itself in March 1945, they encountered an enemy that was broken but fighting desperately. German soldiers knew they were defending their homeland. They fought with courage born of desperation, but they fought with weapons and equipment that were increasingly obsolete or poorly manufactured. American firepower at every level was overwhelming. Artillery that Germans called a wall of fire, fighter bombers that made daylight movement suicidal, tanks and vehicles in numbers that Germany could never hope to match. And at the individual rifleman level, the M1 Garand continued to give American soldiers an edge that German bolt-action rifles could not overcome. Germany surrendered on May 8, 1945. The M1 Garand had served throughout the European theatre, from North Africa to the Elbe River, from Sicily to the heart of the Reich. John Garand remained at Springfield Armory throughout the war, continuing to refine his design and working on new projects. In the late 1940s and early 1950s, he developed a prototype bullpup rifle with selective fire capability, designated the T-31. It featured a radical configuration with the action behind the trigger, allowing a full-length barrel in a shorter overall package. The design showed his continuing innovation, but it never entered production. Military priorities shifted elsewhere. Garand retired in 1953 after 34 years at Springfield Armory. He had risen from consulting engineer to chief civilian engineer, the highest position a civilian could hold at the facility. He settled in Springfield, Massachusetts, near the armory that had been his professional home for more than 3 decades. He remained a regular visitor to the facility, watching as the M14 rifle that would eventually replace his M1 went through development and testing. The M1 Garand continued to serve after the Second World War ended. When conflict erupted in Korea in June 1950, American soldiers again carried Garand's rifle into combat. Production resumed at Springfield Armory to meet wartime demands. Harrington and Richardson Arms and International Harvester Company also received contracts to manufacture the rifle. The rifle performed well in Korea's brutal conditions, from the frozen hell of the Chosin Reservoir to the sweltering summer offensives. It remained the standard American service rifle throughout that conflict. The M1 Garand was not officially replaced until March 1958, when the M14 was adopted. Many rifles remained in service even longer, with Reserve and National Guard units. The last standard M1 Garand rolled off the Springfield Armory production line in May 1957. Total production exceeded 5.4 million rifles over the weapon's manufacturing life. It remains one of the most successful military rifles in history. John Garand died on February 16, 1974, in Springfield, Massachusetts. He was 86 years old. He was survived by his wife Nellie and their 2 children. He was buried in Hillcrest Park Cemetery. The year before his death, Garand was inducted into the United States Army Ordnance Corps Hall of Fame. The citation acknowledged both his inventive genius and his engineering skills. It noted that due to his initiative and instinctive inventive genius, the American soldier possessed a firepower advantage during the Second World War. On June 6, 1994, the 50th anniversary of D-Day, the Garand Collectors Association dedicated a bronze bust of John Garand at the Springfield Armory National Historic Site. The bust sits in what was once the workshop where Garand spent decades developing his masterpiece. The plaque beneath it reads simply, "A quiet genius who gave to his adopted country the greatest battle implement ever devised, the M1 rifle." The M1 Garand remains one of the most respected military rifles ever produced. Collectors prize original examples. The civilian marksmanship program still sells refurbished rifles to qualified American citizens. Competitive shooters use them in matches that specifically honor the rifle's heritage. But the true legacy of the M1 Garand cannot be measured in auction prices, or match scores, or the number of rifles sitting in collectors' safes. It can be measured in the testimony of German soldiers who faced it, in the respect, and yes, the fear, that the rifle inspired in men who fought against it. The M1 Garand proved that a nation's industrial capacity could be as decisive as the courage of its soldiers. American factories outproduced German innovation at a ratio that no tactical brilliance could overcome. For every advanced German weapon that reached the front lines, American arsenals delivered 10 reliable Garands. Every modern assault rifle descends from the concept that John Garand proved viable nearly 90 years ago. The idea that an ordinary infantryman should have a weapon that can fire multiple shots without manual cycling between each one. The idea that reliability and simplicity matter as much as raw performance. The idea that victory belongs to the soldier whose weapon works every time he needs it. German infantry feared the M1 Garand because it worked. It worked in North Africa and Sicily and Italy. It worked on the beaches of Normandy and in the hedgerows beyond. It worked in the frozen forests of the Ardennes and on the banks of the Rhine. It worked in the hands of millions of American soldiers who trusted their lives to John Garand's design. That is the story of the M1 Garand, a Canadian immigrant who became an American patriot, a rifle that changed warfare forever, a weapon that helped save the world. If you found this story worthwhile, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment telling us where you are watching from. Share these accounts of courage and innovation with others who appreciate the history that shaped our world. Thank you for watching. Thank you for remembering the soldiers who carried these rifles and the quiet genius who created them.